Hey guys, Dan here with your quarantine video for the day. I was going to do a full movie review for the week's movies, which I have been doing every week since the quarantine began, pretty much. But the Scooby-Doo movie came out, so I wanted to check that out, and a couple other things as well. There's a Capone movie with Tom Hardy, but I think we're going to do that in a few days because first I noticed that there was this new version of Valley Girl that came out on demand, and I actually have never seen the original Valley Girl from 1983, the first real Nicolas Cage movie. He had a small part in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but this was like a starring role for Nicolas Cage. And I'm not the biggest Nick Cage fan, but back in the 80s and early 90s, I did like a lot of his stuff. So for some reason, though, I just never got around to seeing the original. So I thought, you know what? Why don't I watch both, do a compare and contrast? And so here is my review for today. It is comparing the two versions of Valley Girl. And I've even, can't really see this shirt, but I've even dressed for the part. I've got my Duran Duran shirt on, the whole new wave thing. It's the new waviest shirt that I own. I unfortunately don't have any like Thompson Twins or Plimsolls t-shirts, but Duran Duran will have to work. The original did have some songs there in the movie from Duran Duran. So I think part of the reason I stayed away from this movie so long, first of all, it was rated R. So, back when it came out, well, when it first came out, I was like 6. But, in the 80s, it wasn't like it was really on the radar. And we certainly watched some R-rated comedies back in the day, but they were much more like comedic, Coming to America, Police Academy, and less so like of the romance tip. Like I didn't even see Breakfast Club till I was in high school. So I just sort of, I don't know, never got around to it. And then Nicolas Cage started making horrible movies, so I wasn't really into that. And then also the song Valley Girl by Frank Zappa and his daughter Moon Unit Zappa always was like super annoying to me. So I was like, oh, does this have something to do with this song? I thought maybe it was like the theme to the movie. So I just stayed away from it. But I decided to watch it, and both movies essentially follow sort of the same plot. There's definitely differences between the two, which we'll get into a little bit. But essentially, Julie Richmond is the main character. In the new version, she's played by Jessica Roth, or Rothy. I'm not sure how you pronounce it, but she's the gal from Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day to You. And then Deborah Foreman was the original Julie Richmond. She does make a little cameo appearance in the new one as well. And then Nicolas Cage in the original plays Randy. And here in the new version, we've got Josh Whitehouse who does that. And if you don't recognize the name, he is going to be in the new Game of Thrones prequel series, apparently. But other than that, he hasn't done a whole lot. He did Poldark, the BBC series, which I never saw. But so this is one of his first, like, real big things. And essentially the plot takes on a Romeo and Juliet sort of thing with this very popular gal, Julie, with her group of friends and her clique, and she's going out with the star on the football team. And in the new version, that is played by Logan Paul, who we'll get into, I guess, details of this movie in a little bit. But he plays Logan, or he is Logan Paul. He plays Mickey. They did change the names for that. Tommy was the football player in the original movie. He was played by Michael Bowen. But she sort of is loving her life a little bit. From the outside, it looks like she's got everything, but oh wait, then she meets this other guy, he's really cool, and he's from kind of the wrong side of the tracks, and all of this. And so she has to sort of choose between the two, and her friends don't like this dude. He's bad news. In the original version, Julie's parents are actually way cooler, and the dad is kind of like go with your heart, kind of thing. In the new version, the parents are very much like against this, and they try to be supportive and invite him over for dinner, but that goes horribly because he shows up and overhears the dad talking trash on him, so he just leaves, and all this. So that ends up causing like this big weeks-long fight between Julie and her parents, and that's, you know, in the new version. Unlike Romeo and Juliet, nobody kills themselves at the end, but without giving away too much, I mean, if you saw the original, the new version ends pretty much the same way, but I think anybody that's seen a romance movie knows how this ends and which guy she ends up with. But so that's the overall, you know, plot basics of these two movies. They are quite different, though, in execution. Now, first of all, the 1983 version was an R-rated comedy. Now, this was before PG-13 existed, so, you know, I guess there's definitely some gratuitous nudity here, as was sort of the staple of the early 80s comedy, because they were like, well, shoot, if we're not going to get a PG, then why don't we go all the way, show some boobs, you know, whatever, a couple of shower scenes, and, you know, Porky's and things like that sort of got the ball rolling. But you see this in a lot of R-rated comedies of the 80s. Police Academy certainly falls in line with that, too. There's several just straight gratuitous scenes. But there's also some drug use in the original. There's some peppered in F-bombs. They're not rampant, but certainly peppered in. And the new version opted for a PG-13. So it's definitely toned down in that regard. In fact, I'm not even sure if they drop one F-bomb. I know they're allowed to as a PG-13 movie, but I don't think they do. The language is fairly safe, realistically, and there's no sex scenes, really, and there's romance scenes, but there's not any drugs that I can remember. I mean, they go to a party, but like in the original, you see people like snorting lines, you know, of coke. Nothing like that in the new version. So that's one of the main differences, is that the new version is certainly more tame. But the other big difference in the execution is that the original sort of lets the original music and the soundtrack paint some of the scenes, you know. You've got a lot of new wave hits in that original version. I already mentioned Duran Duran, but you know, I Melt With You is one of the sort of running themes through the movie, the modern English song. But there was also, you know, a couple of underground artists that were real big on K-Rock, the Los Angeles alternative station at the time. Well, they still are, but, you know, at the time they were real big too. But they would play like bands like Josie Cotton and The Replacements and the Plimsouls and a lot of that kind of stuff. And so that was part of that. But also there were, you know, some famous songs in there too. Who Can It Be Now by Men at Work is one of them. Like I said, I'm Out With You. But the new one, they decided to go straight up jukebox musical with it. And so there are some original songs kind of peppered in soundtrack-wise, but more often than not, it is the actors in the movie singing the songs. So you have them singing. And, you know, look, the budget is much bigger here. The budget for the original was less than $500,000. And really, by the way, it was a huge hit of a movie, because for that budget, I mean, it made $17 million on less than $500,000. So, you know, kudos to them. But this one is a bigger budget picture, and as such, got the rights to some really, you know, popular songs. I mean, it kicks off with We Got the Beat, but then in there also is Bad Reputation and Hey Mickey and Girls Just Want to Have Fun and You Might Think, and a couple of Madonna songs, Crazy for You, Material Girl, Take on Me gets sang, Boys Don't Cry by The Cure, Under Pressure by Queen. So, and these are all sang by the actors in the movie. So they made this much more, well, it's a jukebox musical for sure, but much more, I don't know if accessible is the right word, but certainly toned down, more sanitized, and more in the vein of like a Rock of Ages or Mamma Mia type thing. You know, your typical jukebox musical movies that you think of. So I think this can help the movie in some ways, and I think in other ways it hurts the movie. So essentially, I don't know. I guess at this point, should I maybe break down the two movies separately? So the 1983 movie surprised me, first of all. I was actually shocked how well it holds up. I really went into it with kind of low expectations. I mean, it's not one of these 80s movies that necessarily gets talked about a bunch. I mean, people liked it. Obviously, it was a big hit at the time. But even growing up, I never heard people say, like, oh, hey, did you check out Valley Girl? Like, as far as Nicolas Cage's early work, I knew, a lot about Moonstruck. I had seen Moonstruck when it first came out. My parents really loved Peggy Sue Got Married, so I knew that. I still have not seen that myself, but I knew what that was. And then Raising Arizona from the Coen brothers. Those were kind of three really big early Nicolas Cage movies. I had heard of Valley Girl, of course, but it wasn't one of those that got talked about. So I thought, okay, well, this probably doesn't hold up. It's probably real corny. It's probably very silly, and they're really going over the top with the Valley Girl language. And to be honest, really almost none of that applies. I mean, it is dated in terms of a little bit of the language for sure. They don't go crazy overboard. Like, here's the thing. If you've ever heard the song Valley Girl, which I mentioned, by Frank Zappa, they go way over the top. Every other line is like, oh, grody to the max, and gag me with a spoon, and all that kind of stuff. And so I just sort of thought that would be this movie, and it really wasn't. It was peppered in an okay amount. It wasn't overdone, but it was certainly there. And, look, this was on sort of the cusp of that movement. Did people really talk that way, or did the movie and the subsequent song sort of usher that in? I'm not sure, and I don't know if we'll ever know the real answer to that. Did this movie sort of create, and the song, sort of create the Valley Girl sound and vibe? I'm not sure. But either way, it wasn't overkill in this movie at all. So that's number one. Number two, it's also dated sort of for the song choices and everything. It's definitely very, very steeped in 80s new wave, which to me, that's a success. I love that sound. I really got heavy into that sound, like in the early to mid 90s, when they started to release like a bunch of the 80s compilation CDs, and like, underground 80s, and alternative hits of the 80s stuff, that I was not really familiar with, listening to only top 40 radio in the late 80s and 90s. So that all dates it. I will admit that. But not as much as I thought. No more than a John Hughes soundtrack, or no more than a lot of those, Weird Science and like all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's dated. It's a product of its time for sure. But the themes in this really, really do still hold up. And I think partially because it is kind of a Romeo and Juliet riff. So it's sort of timeless in that regard. But even, I don't know, the performances weren't over the top. This is Nicolas Cage just starting out. And it sort of reminds me of Keanu Reeves. Like, look, at the beginning, Nicolas Cage, I think, did kind of one thing. He sort of stayed in this lane, and then he branched out, and it had mixed results. I think his action movies are mostly pretty stupid, way over the top, but I think his dramatic performances are actually pretty good, even to the present day. He did a movie, Joe, a few years ago that I thought he did a really good job in, drama-wise, and even in the early 2000s, he did The Family Man. I thought that was really good. So I think Nicolas Cage has those two modes. Keanu Reeves, sort of the same thing. Like in the early 80s, well, late 80s, I guess, for him, it was, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and Whoa, and like Speed, and, all these like sort of dumb jock type movies. And then he obviously has branched out into, now his action movies. I love he goes the opposite of Nick Cage. For me, the dramatic Keanu Reeves is not all that great, but the action Keanu Reeves is fantastic. So it's sort of in that vein with Nicolas Cage, I think. But this was not an overdone performance. It was, look, he was the bad boy. He's a little bit maybe of a caricature, but I think he got the job done for the role that was required of him. And then, like I said, the parents in the 80s version were real cool. The dad I had recognized, and I had to look him up because I didn't recognize the name. But let's see, Frederick Forrest is the actor, and he is still with us, although he doesn't really act anymore. But he's been around forever. He's a big Coppola guy, which is kind of funny because, of course, Nick Cage is related to the Coppola family. But, he worked with him in The Conversation and Apocalypse Now and a couple other things. But then he also, I knew actually where I most recognized him from, and that's the first season of 21 Jump Street. He was the captain for that, like, first 13 episode season that they did for 21 Jump Street. So that's sort of sadly where I know him most from. But it makes sense because that was right around that time as well. It was only about 4 years after Valley Girl. So I wouldn't have recognized him anyway, maybe from some of those older movies from the 60s because he didn't look exactly the same anyway. But, he was a great dad in this movie. And definitely a more understanding one. I'm not exactly sure why they went sort of the other way with the new version, maybe just for a little more tension. I don't know. But I love the guy playing the dad in the new version, too, because it is Rob Huebel, who has been in many, many things. He does, Children's Hospital, and he was on Transparent, and he was in The Descendants, one of my favorite movies, as George Clooney's friend. So, he was great. And Judy Greer plays the mom. She always pops up everywhere. Jurassic World and Arrested Development and so many things. She's just kind of everywhere. It seems. Ant-Man. She plays the ex-wife of Paul Rudd in Ant-Man. But they made great a great parenting couple in this movie. But boy, they were really kind of harsh on the Randy character, which look, it makes sense for the dramatic purposes, but one other difference I didn't actually mention with the new version, let's kind of get off the old version for a second, is that it takes place in flashback. So we see in the opening scene, Alicia Silverstone is the older version of Julie Richmond, the current day version of Julie Richmond, and her teenage daughter is now going through some things as well. And so, okay, we gotta, explain to her, look, I know you think your life has always been easy, well, my life, hasn't been so great. It's great now, but in the 80s, I went through something very similar to you. I was a Valley Girl, and here's my story. And, look, it's an interesting conceit. I don't mind that they did it because I think it made the movie more realistic. I mean, yes, it was a jukebox musical, and right after the first song where they're singing in the mall to We Got the Beat, her daughter does say, like, okay, wait, you're telling me everybody got up and sang in the food court of the mall, and Alicia Silverstone's like, well, that's how I remember it. So it's sort of tongue-in-cheek in that way, so you are led to believe, okay, maybe these people, in her mind, this is how it went. She's romanticizing it. So it was sort of cute. But then halfway through the movie, they kind of dropped it, and then they brought it back one last time at the end, for sort of some closure, and she sort of explained a little bit about some of the characters, and then we see as the audience during the credits like what happened to the character supposedly, but they sort of drop it halfway through it. I thought they could have gone back to it at least a couple more times, where she's like, when the parents maybe aren't really liking Randy, the daughter could be like, oh, wait, Grandma and Grandpa and you had a huge fight, I didn't know that, whatever. I don't know. But they sort of like abandoned it halfway through, so that's not the best. But I do like that they sort of gave a tongue-in-cheek answer for why this version is a jukebox musical. And I like Alicia Silverstone. I've always liked her ever since Clueless. And it's funny because Valley Girl has sort of always been compared to Clueless, in the sense that, like, movies like Clueless might not exist without Valley Girl and that sort of thing. They're both sort of different takes on Shakespeare stuff. So, who knows? Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But it's interesting then that they got her to play the elder version of Julie Richmond. But okay, so this dude is the bad dude from the tracks, Randy. He has a band in this version that is mildly successful around town, and it's made up of him and Mae Whitman, one of my favorites from all the way back in the Arrested Development days, and then today on Good Girls. I love watching that. And then the other one is Mario Revolori, who I was not familiar with, but I know Tony Revolori from things like the Grand Budapest Hotel, and he looks just like him. So I'm like, okay, these guys have to be related, and sure enough, they are brothers. So there you go. And at first, I was not sure about the whole Mae Whitman thing. So here's the deal. This movie was actually shot about 3 years ago, and it was supposed to come out in 2018. But because of the whole Logan Paul Suicide Forest kerfuffle, he really made a jackass out of himself and was sort of an enemy of people for a while. So I guess now that that's sort of died down, they said, okay, let's release the movie in May of 2020, and then of course the quarantine hit, so they've decided to, like a lot of movies, just sort of forego their theatrical window and just throw it up on demand, and at all your streaming services. So well, not streaming, but like, stream to purchase, Amazon Prime and iTunes and all that sort of stuff. So so that's how you can get it now. But I didn't realize this when I saw that there was going to be a Valley Girl. Even as far as right before I watched it, I still was thinking like this was always going to be like a low budget kind of thing, and then I found out no, it was going to be like a summer release movie, and they were expecting big things for it, which I had no idea. So it would explain why the budget is so large, with all the music rights and everything, and how they got some pretty cool actors to be involved with it. Logan Paul, let's talk about him for a second. He plays this dumb football jock character surprisingly well. Now, I don't know much about Logan Paul or his brother. I know they both have YouTube channels and were very, very popular for a while until the whole Suicide Forest thing happened and sort of, collapsed the Logan Paul empire. But, I actually think he did okay here. I didn't think he was amazing, but he did all right, The role does not require great acting chops, and his character doesn't really sing much, if at all. I can't even remember. Most of the songs, are from the women, Julie and her friends, and or Julie and Randy, or Randy's band, or whatever. So the whole Mae Whitman thing is this. When I was first watching it and she came on, I was like, wait. We've been watching Mae Whitman. I know this was filmed 3 years ago, but we've been watching Mae Whitman in high school since Arrested Development in the very early 2000s. Are we still supposed to think Mae Whitman is in high school when I'm watching her on Good Girls with a teenage child of her own? Like, wow, Mae Whitman in real life at this point in time is 31. So, her kid on Good Girls, they probably make her a little older on Good Girls, so she's more of a contemporary with Retta and Christina Hendricks, who plays her older sister in Good Girls. So, okay, so probably in Good Girls, she's supposed to be in her mid-30s, so maybe they're aging her down a lot here. But as the movie goes on, it strikes me that I don't think she's actually in high school. I think she's a friend of Randy's and in the band. And it really, I don't even think Randy's in high school. I think these are all slightly older people. So I think Mae Whitman maybe is supposed to be in her early 20s in this movie. So then I was like, okay, that makes a little more sense, because I know she looks maybe still pretty young, but to play high school for 15 years is rough. Then we're into Grease and Beverly Hills 90210 territory. But anyway, so I sort of forgave that as the movie went on. But the whole thing with jukebox musicals is the songs can be great, and the singing can be great. And I didn't mind a lot of the talent here. I think Jessica Roth can sing, which I didn't know. I mean, she sings. I guess she does. Does she sing in Happy Death Day? There's like a montage. But she doesn't sing in it. That's over the Paramore song in the second Happy Death Day. Which, by the way, side note, both Happy Death Day movies are really good. They're really fun horror movies. So just FYI about that. And I like this girl a lot. I think with the right parts and with the right management and stuff, I think she can go very far in the industry. She's good here too in Valley Girl. But my problem with the whole jukebox musical thing is, oftentimes it doesn't give the characters a ton of time to develop. And that's kind of what we saw here with the 2020 version. I really wish that instead of them singing for 3 minutes some 80s hit over kind of a montage of things, I wish we maybe got some dialogue in there. Even if it was like them singing, they could still, pause during the bridge or the instrumental part of a song and have some dialogue. I wouldn't mind that. Rock of Ages is a pretty classic example of that because the music in that is great. I'm a huge 80s hair metal fan, so for me, I was so excited for Rock of Ages, and then it was, oh my god, was it disappointing, you know. But the acting was so over the top in Rock of Ages. I still can't decide whether they knew they were making a corny movie or not. I really go back and forth on that. I think maybe they did, but it's hard to tell. Here, when I heard that there was even a 2020 version of Valley Girl, I thought, without knowing it was a musical or anything, I just thought, you know, boy, they're going to just go for all these cheap 80s jokes, and they're going to really overdo the whole Valley Girl act, and it's going to be so hard to stomach. And they didn't really do that. Like, both of these movies kind of subverted my my thought on how it was going to be, my preconceived notion. And neither one really was that way, which is interesting. But, you know, because of the jukebox musical nature, there just wasn't enough development here to go on. I do like the framing device of the flashbacks with Alicia Silverstone. Well, I guess present-day Alicia Silverstone. She's the one flashing back. But at the same time, it's like they sort of get rid of that halfway through for more music. So there's a lot of things we don't really get that I think we did get more of in the original because they took the time to develop the characters a little bit more. These characters aren't that deep necessarily, but you could have done with a little more dialogue. Like there's a little bit of a side plot with Sally Ride where Julie and her parents sort of put aside the fight for a second to watch the first female go up in space. So it's like a little bit female empowerment, and there's a little bit of those messages, and the main character's a lesbian, and so there's that angle that obviously the 80s one didn't have, or probably couldn't have. So, you know, there's tweaks that way. But one thing is, they almost tamped down completely the Valley Girl speak. She almost really doesn't go into the whole Valley Girl bit, hardly at all. So much so that at one point when she's in a fight with Randy, he actually, like, talks back, like, kind of mimics her, supposedly, in this Valley Girl motif. You know, oh, like, are you so grossed out? Or, you know, whatever he says. And I just thought to myself, well, she hasn't really talked like that much in this whole movie. Why is he doing it? Like, why is he sort of mimicking her, but with things she hasn't really been saying? So I think they actually could have toned the Valley Girl talk up a little bit. Like, I thought it was going to be way, way, way over the top, and then it's almost absent from the movie. It's weird. So that was kind of odd. But look, you know, the whole 80s retro romance thing has been done a lot. You know, Take Me Home Tonight is a prime example. And there's another one that sat on the shelf for like 3 years before they released it. And that movie, I don't think is that good. It's not very memorable. This one I think will be a little more so because of the music. But, you know, they've even gotten some interesting details down to, like, Thomas Lennon from Reno 911 plays Rodney Bingheimer, who is a very, very famous DJ on K-Rock. He actually just retired a few years ago, but in the 80s, he was like Mr. K-Rock. He was everything. And K-Rock is sponsoring their prom in the new version, and so they have Thomas Lennon be Rodney Bingheimer. And look, to most people, that would be like, well, okay, I don't know who this is, or is this even a real person, or whatever. I don't care. But his impression of Rodney is pretty spot on. And to me, as a person that's been in the radio industry for 20 years, it's like, I know that voice. I've heard Rodney's show plenty of times. And boy, what a great impression. So, you know, they even went so far to get that. But then at the end, in the epilogue, she starts saying things like, Alicia Silverstone reveals that the song "I Melt with You" was written about her, you know, and so her daughter's like, "Oh my God, that song they play on K-Rock all the time was written for you." Okay, that's where I have to be a little nitpicky because it's like that band came from England. They're not from LA at all. But she does claim that after they left the prom, they moved to New York, and okay, the band Modern English did break down the doors in New York. They didn't get big until they got to New York. So on that part, I was like, okay, that sort of is a little what happened. But But again, that's sort of nitpicky stuff. I just think it's weird that for a movie that was so down to the letter of like, this is how Rodney Bingheimer looks and sounds, a person that 98% of the audience watching this movie has never heard of, it just seemed like a little bit of a reach. But overall, I was definitely impressed with both versions of this movie. The earlier one is better for sure, for several reasons. But I think the new one is honestly pretty good as well. Like, it's not nearly as good, but if you've never seen the original, if you are just kind of going in for a light kind of romance movie with some fun music, this will definitely hit the spot. So I give the original Valley Girl, 1983 version, I give that an A-. I think it is very, very John Hughes-esque in its themes, in the tone, and how well it holds up 30, 40 years later almost. And then I give the 2020 version of Valley Girl a B-. It is still kind of good, not as good, and I don't think we'll be talking about it, in 20 years or 25 years. I think maybe part of the reason we talk about the old one so much is because it is Nicolas Cage's, first big movie. And again, is it even talked about that much? I don't know. Not really anymore. But anyway, I'm glad I watched both of these movies. It really, gave me a new perspective on that whole scene, because I really thought I would hate that first movie, and then when I liked it, I was like, well, now I'm going to hate the second movie because I really like the first one, and the second one is also pretty decent. As far as Jukebox Musical goes, it's definitely up there. It's better than both the Mamma Mia movies. It's better than Rock of Ages for sure. So I will give it credit for all of that. And I like sort of that Alicia Silverstone framing device too that they use. So that's it for today. I'm glad I was able to do this. I'm glad I thought to do this because yes, I do want to still review some of these other movies, the Scooby-Doo movie and Capone and stuff. But I'm glad I was able to give both of these Valley Girl versions a view, and to give it their due in a longer form review. When I do my weekly movie reviews, I try to keep them under like 10 minutes a clip, and here we've gone on about a half hour talking about just two movies. So, and they're kind of the same movie. But thank you so much for watching. We have more on the channel. I know I said I was going to kind of slow down now that I'm back to work at my part-time job as well. But I have not slowed down yet. There's still videos coming every day, it seems. We're in the 60s with the day count of the quarantine. I think this is day 63 that I've been making videos. So there's still more to come. I have Dan Does Disney with Tim this week. I have Dead to Me Season 2 review with Melissa. We may get a Frasier Friday on Friday if I can get that together with Joe. And then tomorrow and Wednesday are the final episodes this season of The Masked Singer. I don't think I'm going to do an episode both days about that, but I think we'll recap after the finale on Wednesday for both episodes. So a lot of things still coming on the channel. Thank you for the support. Thank you for your comments always. Let me know what you think of either of these Valley Girl movies in the comments. And that's it. Stay safe. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.